Right. Hello, everybody. We're doing the second half here of our little dual video, I should say, on Abraham Lincoln. The first video was just our normal biography video, pretty much explaining their lives beforehand, explaining their presidency. So Lincoln fits that category. We've accomplished that. What I wanted to do with a second intended to be smaller video, was I wanted to take the time specifically to try to read some of his writings, some of his speeches that he made that I feel are important to his character, important to his history, and very much I felt that if I had done them in the other video, it would have been drug out way too long, and B, I know that not everyone probably watches the thing all the way through, so there was no guarantee that anyone would get to see parts of those speeches. So this video is solely, we're just going to read a couple of his speeches. I have selected, I'm trying to count here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them that we're going to read. 4 of the 5 consist of when he was president, and only 1 of them is from prior. So all we're going to do here is just kind of read from. I have this big old collection that I've shown before of his writings that we're going to read from this. This is in his original writing of the text, so it's kind of authentic. I mean, they pretty much printed it the same way that Lincoln would have wrote it, and the same way he pronounced words. It's not modernized text at all, so this would be pretty much as if Lincoln was reading it, except someone else is reading it. But we're just going to merely read some of these speeches, and just to kind of give a glimpse of the eloquence of this man. Lincoln was a great public speaker, and he wouldn't look it, but he was. That was one of his big talents, was he was able to get his point across. He was able to speak a message, but he was also able to do it at times in as few words as possible. And it was a real talent of the man for speech making that a lot of presidents, even today, don't really have. So the first speech that we have found in here that I am going to go ahead and read from is the speech entitled Fragment on Sectionalism, and this is dated in July of 1856. So this is before the Civil War breaks out. This is before Lincoln runs for the presidency, and this is kind of right on the eve of him running for the Illinois Senate against Stephen Douglas. But this, keep in mind, this is 1850s. Slavery, by the late 1850s, is becoming a noticeable dividing line that North and South are slowly starting to rip apart. And Lincoln kind of reflects on the attitudes of this time. He reflects on the situation that the country finds itself in at that time. Right? It is constantly objected to Fremont and Dayton that they are supported by a sectional party who, by their sectionalism, endanger the national union. This objection, more than all others, causes men really opposed to slavery extension to hesitate. Practically, it is the most difficult objection we have to meet. For this reason, I now propose to examine it a little more carefully than I have hitherto done or seen it done by others. First, then, what is the question between the parties, respectively represented by Buchanan and Fremont? Side note, this is also pertaining to 1856, the presidential election that would happen that year, and will be between James Buchanan and John Fremont of the Republicans. So this is like a lead up to the 1856 election as well. Simply this: shall slavery be allowed to extend into U.S. territories now legally free? Buchanan says it shall, and Fremont says it shall not. That is the naked issue, and the whole of it. Lay the prospective platforms side by side, and the difference between them will be found to amount to precisely that. True, each party charges upon the other designs much beyond what is involved in the issue, as stated, but as these charges cannot be fully proved either way, it is probably better to reject them on both sides and stick to the naked issue, as it is clearly made up on the record. And now to restate the question. Shall slavery be allowed to extend into U.S. territories now legally free? I beg to know how one side of that question is more sectional than the other. Of course, I expect to effect nothing with the man who makes the charge of sectionalism without caring whether it is just or not. But of the candid, fair man who has been puzzled with this charge, I do ask how is one side of this question more sectional than the other? I beg of him to consider well and answer calmly. If one side be as sectional as the other, nothing is gained. As to sectionalism, by change sides, so that each must choose sides of the question on some other ground, as I should think, according as the one side or the other shall appear nearest right. If he shall really think slavery ought to be extended, let him go to Buchanan. If he think it ought not, let him go to Fremont. But Fremont and Dayton are both residents of the Free States, and this fact has been vaunted in high places as excessive sectionalism. While interested individuals become indignant and excited against this manifestation of sectionalism, I am very happy to know that the Constitution remains calm, keeps cool upon the subject. It does say that President and Vice President shall be resident of different states, but it does not say that one must live in a slave and the other in a free state. It has been a custom to take one from a slave and the other from a free state, but the custom has not at all been uniform. In 1828, General Jackson and Mr. Calhoun, both from slave states, were placed on the same ticket, and Mr. Adams and Dr. Rush, both from free states, were pitted against them. General Jackson and Mr. Calhoun were elected and qualified and served under the election, yet the whole thing never suggested the idea of sectionalism. In 1841, the President, General Harrison, died, by which Mr. Tyler, the Vice President and a slave state man, became President. Mr. Mangum, another slave state man, was placed in the vice presidential chair, served out the term, and no fuss about it, no sectionalism thought of. In 1853, the present president came into office. He is a free state man. Mr. King, the new vice president-elect, was a slave state man, but he died without entering on the duties of his office. At first, his vacancy was filled by Atchison, another slave state man, but he soon resigned, and the place was supplied by Bright, a free state man. So that right now, and for the year and a half last past, our president and vice president are both actually free state men. But it is said the friends of Fremont avow the purpose of electing him exclusively by free state votes, and that this is unendurable sectionalism. This statement of fact is not exactly true. With the friends of Fremont, it is an expected necessity, but it is not an avowed purpose to elect him, if at all, principally by free state votes. But it is with equal intensity true that Buchanan's friends expect to elect him, if at all, chiefly by slave state votes. Here again, the sectionalism is just as much on one side as the other. The thing which gives most color to the charge of sectionalism made against those who oppose the spread of slavery into free territory is the fact that they can get no votes in the slave states, while their opponents get all or nearly so in the slave states and also a large number in the free states. To state it in another way, the extensionists can get votes all over the nation, while the restrictionists can get them only in the free states. This being the fact, why is it so? It is not because one side of the question dividing them, it is more sectional than the other, nor because of any difference in the mental or moral structure of the people North and South. It is because in that question the people of the South have an immediate, palpable, and immensely great pecuniary interest, while with the people of the North it is merely an abstract question of moral right, with only slight and remote pecuniary interest added. The slaves of the South, at a moderate estimate, are worth 1,000 millions of dollars. Let it be permanently settled that this property may extend to new territory without restraint, and it greatly enhances, perhaps quite doubles its value at once. This immense, palpable pecuniary interest on the question of extending slavery unites the Southern people as one man, but it cannot be demonstrated that the North will gain a dollar by restricting it. Moral principle is all, or nearly all, that unites us of the North. Pity 'tis it is so, but this is a looser bond than pecuniary interest. Right here is the plain cause of their perfect union and our want of it. And see how it works. If a Southern man aspires to be president, they choke him down instantly, in order that the glittering prize of the presidency may be held up on Southern terms to the greedy eyes of Northern ambition. With this they tempt us and break in upon us. The Democratic Party in 1844 elected a Southern president. Since then, they have neither had a Southern candidate for election or nomination. Their conventions of 1848 to 52 and 1856 have been struggles exclusively among Northern men, each vying to outbid the other for the Southern vote, the South standing calmly by to finally cry going, going, gone to the highest bidder, and at the same time to make its power more distinctly seen, and thereby to secure a still higher bid at the next succeeding struggle. Actions speak louder than words is the maxim, and if true, the South now distinctly says to the North, give us the measures and you will take the men. The total withdrawal of Southern aspirants for the presidency multiplies the number of Northern ones. These last, in competing with each other, commit themselves to the utmost verge that through their own greediness they have the least hope their Northern supporters will bear. Having got committed in a race of competition, necessity drives them into union to sustain themselves. Each at first secures all he can, on personal attachments to him, and through hopes resting on him personally. Next, they unite with one another, and with the perfectly banded South, to make the offensive position they have got into a party measure. This done, large additional numbers are secured. When the repeal of the Missouri Compromise was first proposed at the North, there was literally nobody in favor of it. In February of 1854, our legislature met in call, or extra session. From then, Douglas sought an endorsement of his then pending measure of repeal. In our legislature were about 70 Democrats to 30 Whigs. The former held a caucus, in which it was resolved to give Douglas the desired endorsement. Some of the members of the caucus bolted, would not stand for it, and they now divulge the secrets. They say that the caucus fairly confessed that the repeal was wrong, and they placed their determination to endorse it solely on the ground that it was necessary to sustain Douglas. Here we have the direct evidence of how the Nebraska bill obtained its strength in Illinois. It was given not in a sense of right, but in the teeth of a sense of wrong, to sustain Douglas. So Illinois was divided. So New England for Pierce, Michigan for Cass, Pennsylvania for Buchanan, and all for the Democratic Party. And when by such means they have got a large portion of the Northern people into a position contrary to their own honest impulses and sense of right, they have the impudence to turn upon those who do stand firm, and call them sectional. Were it not too serious a matter, this cool impudence would be laughable, to say the least, recurring to the question, shall slavery be allowed to extend into U.S. territory now legally free? This is a sectional question, that is to say, it is a question in its nature calculated to divide the American people geographically. Who is to blame for that? Who can help it? Either side can help it, but how? Simply by yielding to the other side. There is no other way. In the whole range of possibility, there is no other way. Then which side shall yield? To this again, there can be but one answer, the side which is in the wrong. True, we differ as to which side is wrong, and we boldly say, let all who really think slavery ought to be spread into free territory openly go over against us. There is where they rightfully belong. But why should any go who really think slavery ought not to spread? Do they really think the right ought to yield to the wrong? Are they afraid to stand by the right? Do they fear that the Constitution is too weak to sustain them in the right? Do they really think that by right surrendering to wrong, their hopes of our Constitution, our Union, and our liberties can possibly be bettered? That kind of gives a view. He's more dealing with the politics of 1856, with the Democrat and Republican nominations for president. But he's making a point that these people that are in the higher levels of government running for the presidential office, when they're calling people sectionalism, he's basically calling them out and saying they're trying to do it to anyone that basically will not cave into Southern demands, is what I'm basically getting. Is that if you will not try to appease the South, you're not going to get into the presidency. And these men, in their efforts, even though they're Northerners, try to appease the South. In their efforts to do so, anyone that stays that hard line, stays the course, still admits that slavery is wrong, and tries to oppose its expansion, they call sectional. When in reality, it's both sides at play here. It's not just specific people. The second speech that we are going to read is Lincoln's speech of his first inauguration. And this is probably, I think, the longest of them. If I can find it here. Here, presidential writings. Here we are. The first inaugural address was delivered on March 4th of 1861 in Washington, D.C., on the steps of the Capitol building by Abraham Lincoln. Fellow citizens of the United States, in compliance with a custom as old as the government itself, I appear before you to address you briefly, and to take in your presence the oath prescribed by the Constitution of the United States, to be taken by the President before he enters on the execution of his office. I do not consider it necessary at present for me to discuss those matters of administration about which there is no special anxiety or excitement. Apprehension seems to exist among the people of the Southern States that by the accession of a Republican administration their property and their peace and personal security are to be endangered. There has never been any reasonable cause for such apprehension. Indeed, the most ample evidence to the contrary has all the while existed, and been open to their inspection. It is found in nearly all the published speeches of him who now addresses you. I do but quote from one of those speeches when I declare that I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. Those who nominated and elected me did so with full knowledge that I had made this, and many similar declarations, and had never recanted them. And more than this, they placed in the platform for my acceptance and as to a law to themselves and to me the clear and emphatic resolution which I now read. Resolved, that the maintenance inviolate of the right of the that the maintenance inviolate of the rights of the states, and especially the right of each state to order and control its own domestic institutions according to its own judgment exclusively, is essential to that balance of power on which the perfection and endurance of our political fabric depend, and we denounce the lawless invasion by armed force of the soil of any state or territory, no matter under what pretext, as among the gravest of crimes. I now reiterate these sentiments, and in doing so, I only press upon the public attention the most conclusive evidence of which the case is susceptible, that the property, peace, and security of no section are to be in any wise endangered by the now incoming administration. I add, too, that all the protection which, consistently with the Constitution and the laws, can be given, will be cheerfully given to all the states when lawfully demanded, for whatever cause, as cheerfully to one section as to another. There is much controversy about the delivering up of fugitives in the service or labor. The clause I now read is as plainly written in the Constitution as any other of its provisions. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. It is scarcely questioned that this provision was intended by those who made it for the reclaiming of what we call fugitive slaves, and the intention of the lawgiver is the law. All members of Congress swear their support to the whole Constitution, to this provision as much as to any other. To the proposition, then, that slaves whose cases come within the terms of this clause shall be delivered up, their oaths are unanimous. Now, if they would make the effort in good temper, could they not with nearly equal unanimity frame and pass a law by means of which to keep good that unanimous oath? There is some difference of opinion whether this clause should be enforced by national or by state authority, but surely that difference is not a very material one. If the slave is to be surrendered, it can be of but little consequence to him or to others by which authority it is done, and should any one, in any case, be content that his oath shall go unkept, on a merely unsubstantial controversy as to how it shall be kept. Again, in any law upon this subject ought not all the safeguards of liberty known in civilized and humane jurisprudence to be introduced, so that a free man be not, in any case, surrendered as a slave? And might it not be well, at the same time, to provide by law for the enforcement of that clause in the Constitution which guarantees that the citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states? I take the official oath today with no mental reservations and with no purpose to construe the Constitution or laws by any hypercritical rules. And while I do not choose how now to specify particular acts of Congress as proper to be enforced, I do suggest that it will be much safer for all, both in official and private stations, to conform to and abide by all those acts which stand unrepealed than to violate any of them, trusting to find impunity and having them held to be unconstitutional. It is 72 years since the first inauguration of a president under our national constitution. During that period, 15 different and greatly distinguished citizens have, in succession, administered the executive branch of the government. They have conducted it through many perils and generally with great success. Yet with all this scope for precedent, I now enter upon the same task for the brief constitutional term of 4 years under great and peculiar difficulty. A disruption of the federal union, heretofore only menaced, is now formidably attempted. I hold that in contemplation of universal law and of the Constitution, the union of these states is perpetual. Perpetuality is implied, if not expressed, in the fundamental law of all national governments. It is safe to assert that no government proper even ever had a provision in its organic law for its own termination. Continue to execute all the express provisions of our national constitution, and the Union will endure forever, it being impossible to destroy it except by some action not provided for in the instrument itself. Again, if the United States be not of government proper, can an association of states in the nature of contract merely can it, as a contract, be peaceably unmade by less than all the parties who made it? One party to a contract may violate it, break it, so to speak, but it does it not require all to lawfully rescind it. Descending from these general principles, we find the proposition that in legal contemplation the Union is perpetual, confirmed by the history of the Union itself. The Union is much older than the Constitution. It was formed, in fact, by the Articles of Association in 1774. It was matured and continued by the Declaration of Independence in 1776. It was further matured in the faith of all the then 13 states expressly plighted and engaged that it should be perpetual by the Articles of Confederation in 1778. And finally, in 1787, one of the declared objects for ordaining and establishing the Constitution was to form a more perfect union. But if the destruction of the Union by one or by a part only of the states be lawfully possible, the Union is less perfect than before the Constitution, having lost the vital element of a perpetuality. It follows from these views that no state, upon its own mere motion, can lawfully get out of the Union. That resolves and ordinances to that effect are legally void, and that acts of violence within any state or states against the authority of the United States are insurrectionary or revolutionary according to circumstances. I therefore consider that in view of the Constitution and the laws the Union is unbroken, and to the extent of my ability I shall take care, as the Constitution itself expressly enjoins upon me, that the laws of the Union be faithfully executed in all the states. Doing this I deem to be only a simple duty on my part, and I shall perform it so far as practicable, unless my rightful masters, the American people, shall withhold the requisite means, or in some authoritative manner direct the contrary. I trust this will not be regarded as a menace, but only as the declared purpose of the Union that it will constitutionally defend and maintain itself. In doing this, there needs to be no bloodshed or violence, and there shall be none, unless it be forced upon the national authority. The power confided to me will be used to hold, occupy, and possess the property and places belonging to the government, and to collect the duties and imposts. But beyond what may be necessary for these objects, there will be no invasion, no using of force against or among the people anywhere. Where hostility to the United States in any interior locality shall be so great and universal as to prevent competent resident citizens from holding the federal offices, there will be no attempt to force obnoxious strangers among the people for that object. While the strict legal right may exist in the government to enforce the exercise of these offices, the attempt to do so would be so irritating and so nearly impracticable withal that I deem it better to forego for the time the uses of such offices. The mails, unless repelled, will continue to be furnished in all parts of the Union, So far as possible, the people everywhere shall have that sense of perfect security which is most favorable to calm and thought reflection. The course here indicated will be followed, unless current events and experience shall show a modification or change to be proper, and in every case and exigency my best discretion will be exercised according to circumstances actually existing, and with a view and a hope of a peaceful solution of the national troubles, and the restoration of fraternal sympathies and affections. Taking a small drink break. Ooh. That there are persons in one section or another who seek to destroy the Union at all events, and are glad of any pretext to do it, I will neither affirm nor deny. But if there be such, I need address no word to them. To those who, however, who really love the Union, may I not speak. Before entering upon so grave a matter as the destruction of our national fabric, with all its benefits, its memories, and its hopes, would it not be wise to ascertain precisely why we do it? Will you hazard so desperate a step, while there is any possibility that any portion of the ills you fly from have no real existence? Will you, while the certain ills you fly to are greater than all the real ones you fly from, will you risk the commission of so fearful a mistake? All profess to be content in the Union if all constitutional rights can be maintained. Is it true, then, that any right, plainly written in the Constitution, has been denied? I think not. Happily, the human mind is so constituted that no party can reach to the audacity of doing this. Think, if you can, of a single instance in which a plainly written provision of the Constitution has ever been denied. If by the mere force of numbers a majority shall deprive a minority of any clearly written constitutional right, it might in a moral point of view justify revolution, certainly would if such right were a vital one. But such is not our case. All the vital rights of minorities and of individuals are so plainly assured to them by affirmations and negations, guarantees, and prohibitions in the Constitution that controversies never arise concerning them. But no organic law can ever be framed with a provision specifically applicable to every question which may occur in practical administration. No foresight can anticipate, nor any document of reasonable length contain express provisions for all possible questions. Shall fugitives from labor be surrendered by national or state authority? The Constitution does not expressly say. May Congress prohibit slavery in the territories? The Constitution does not explicitly say. Must Congress protect slavery in the territories? The Constitution does not expressly say. From questions of this class spring all our constitutional controversies, and we divide upon them into majorities and minorities. If the minority will not acquiesce, the majority must, or the government must cease. There is no other alternative for continuing the government, its acquiesce on one side or the other. If a minority in such case will secede rather than acquiesce, they make a precedent which in turn will divide and ruin them, for a minority of their own will secede from them whenever a majority refuses to be controlled by such minority. For instance, why may not any portion of a new confederacy, a year or two hence, arbitrarily secede again, precisely as portions of the present Union now claim to secede from it? All who cherish disunion sentiments are now being educated to the exact temper of doing this. Is there such perfect identity of interests among the states to compose a new union, as to produce harmony only and prevent renewed secession? Plainly, the central idea of secession is the essence of anarchy. A majority held in restraint by constitutional checks and limitations and always changing easily with deliberate changes of popular opinions and sentiments is the only true sovereign of a free people. Whoever rejects it does of necessity fly to anarchy or to despotism. Unanimity, unanimity is impossible. The rule of a minority as a permanent arrangement is wholly inadmissible, so that rejecting the majority principle, anarchy or despotism in some form is all that is left. I do not forget the position assumed by some that constitutional questions are to be decided by the Supreme Court, nor do I deny that such decisions must be binding in any case upon the parties to a suit, as to the object of that suit, while they are also entitled to very high respect and consideration in all parallel cases by all other departments of the government. And while it is obviously possible that such decision may be erroneous in any given case, still the evil effect following it, being limited to that particular case with the chance that it may be overruled and never become a precedent for other cases, can better be borne than could the evils of a different practice. At the same time, the candid citizen must confess that if the policy of the government upon vital questions affecting the whole people is to be irrevocably fixed by decisions of the Supreme Court, the instant they are made in ordinary litigation between parties and personal actions, the people will have ceased to be their own rulers, having to that extent practically resigned their government into the hands of that eminent tribunal. Nor is there, in this view, any assault upon the court or the judges. It is a duty from which they may not shrink, to decide cases properly brought before them, and it is of no fault of theirs if others seek to turn their decisions to political purposes. One section of our country believes slavery is right, and ought to be extended, while the other believes it is wrong and ought not to be extended. This is the only substantial dispute. The fugitive slave clause of the Constitution and the law for the suppression of the foreign slave trade are each as well enforced, perhaps, as any law can ever be in a community where the moral sense of the people imperfectly supports the law itself. The great body of the people abide by the dry legal obligation in both cases, and a few break over in each. This, I think, cannot be perfectly cured, and it would be worse in both cases after the separation of the sections than before. The foreign slave trade, now imperfectly suppressed, would be ultimately revived without restriction in one section, while fugitive slaves, now only partially surrendered, would not be surrendered at all by the other. Physically speaking, we cannot separate, we cannot remove our respective sections from each other, nor build an impassable wall between them. A husband and wife may be divorced and go out of the presence and beyond the reach of each other, but the different parts of our country cannot do this. They cannot but remain face to face, and intercourse, either admissible or hostile, must continue between them. Is it possible, then, to make that intercourse more advantageous or more satisfactory after separation than before? Can aliens make treaties easier than friends can make laws? Can treaties be more faithfully enforced between aliens than laws can among friends? Suppose you go to war. You cannot fight always, and when after much loss on both sides and no gain on either, you cease fighting, the identical old questions as to terms of intercourse are again upon you. This country, with its institutions, belongs to the people who inhabit it. Whenever they shall grow weary of the existing government, they can exercise their constitutional right of amending it, or their revolutionary right to dismember or overthrow it. I cannot be ignorant of the fact that many worthy and patriotic citizens are desirous of having the national constitution amended. While I make no recommendation of amendments, I fully recognize the rightful authority of the people over the whole subject, to be exercised in either of the modes prescribed in the instrument itself, and I should, under existing circumstances, favor rather than oppose a fair opportunity being afforded the people to act upon it. I will venture to add that to me the convention mode seems preferable, in that it allows amendments to originate with the people themselves instead of only permitting them to take or reject propositions originated by others, not especially chosen for the purpose, and which might not be precisely such as they would wish to either accept or refuse. I understand a proposed amendment to the Constitution, which amendment, however, I have not seen, has passed Congress, to the effect that the federal government shall never interfere with the domestic institutions of the states, including that of persons held to service. To avoid misconstruction of what I have said, I depart from my purpose not to speak of particular amendments, so far as to say that holding such a provision to now be implied by constitutional law, I have no objection to its being made express and irrevocable. I think we're almost done with yeah. The chief magistrate derives all his authority from the people, and they have conferred none upon him to fix terms for the separation of the states. The people themselves can do this also if they choose, but the executive as such has nothing to do with it. His duty is to administer the present government as it came to his hands, and to transmit it unimpaired by him to his successor. Why should there not be a patient confidence in the ultimate justice of the people? Is there any better or equal hope in the world? In our present differences, is either party without faith of being in the right? If the Almighty Ruler of nations, with its eternal youth, truth, and justice, be on your side of the north, or on yours of the south, and that truth and that justice will surely prevail. by the judgment of this great tribunal, the American people. By the frame of the government under which we live, this same people have wisely given their public servants but little power for mischief, and have with equal wisdom provided for the return of that little to their own hands at very short intervals. While the people retain their virtue and vigilance, no administration, by any extreme of wickedness or folly, can very seriously injure the government in the short space of 4 years. My countrymen, one and all, think calmly and well upon this whole subject. Nothing valuable can be lost by taking time. If there be an object to hurry any of you in hot haste to a step which you would never take deliberately, that object will be frustrated by taking time. If there be an object to hurry any of you in hot haste to a step which you would never take deliberately, that object will be frustrated by taking time, but no good object can be frustrated by it. Such of you as are now dissatisfied still have the old Constitution unimpaired, and on the sensitive point the laws of your own framing under it, while the new administration will have no immediate power, if it would, to change either. If it were admitted that you, who are dissatisfied, hold the right side in the dispute, there still is no single good reason for precipitate action. Intelligence, patriotism, Christianity, and a firm reliance on Him who has never yet forsaken this favored land are still competent to adjust in the best way all our present difficulty. In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. The government will not assail you. You can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors. You have no oath registered in heaven to destroy the government, while I shall have the most solemn one to preserve, protect, and defend it. I am loath to close. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. The whole of Lincoln's first inaugural address is pretty much to address the South. He basically, if we notice, he denounces secession as a right, that the process of which has been done, the South is not justified in its secession. Secession is not legal. That, yes, the South is upset, but he also points out that this is the decision of the people, and I will leave it to the people on slavery. And it's obvious that a majority of the American people no longer want slavery. And the South is not wanting to adhere to that. He also makes the point to the South that I am not going to invade you. I am not going to bring you a war unless you yourselves start it. Which they did when they fired on Fort Sumter. But people neo-Confederates seem to forget that. The second speech that we're going to read, and that was the longest one that we had to cover, is the Emancipation Proclamation that formally declared that as of the new year of 1863, all slaves and rebel-held territories would be set free. This is one of the hallmarks of Lincoln's administration. It's one of the hallmark achievements of his presidency, of his career as a politician, and still stands as a defining U.S. document today. And this is not long at all. This is just the reading of the proclamation. By the President of the United States of America, a proclamation. Whereas on the 22nd day of September in the year of our Lord 1862, a proclamation was issued by the President of the United States containing, among other things, the following to it: that on the 1st day of January in the year of our Lord 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be thenceforward, and forever free. And the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authority thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of such persons, and will do no act or acts to repress such persons or any of them in any efforts that they may make for their actual freedom. that the executive will, on the first day of January aforesaid by proclamation, designate the states and parts of states, if any, in which the people thereof, respectively, shall then be in rebellion against the United States, and the fact that any state or the people thereof shall on that day be in good faith represented in the Congress of the United States by members chosen thereto at elections wherein a majority of the qualified voters of such states shall have participated, shall, in the absence of strong countervailing testimony, be deemed conclusive evidence that such state and the people are not then in rebellion against the United States. Now therefore I, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, by virtue of the power in me vested as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States in time of actual armed rebellion against the authority and government of the United States, and as a fit and necessary war measure for suppressing said rebellion, do on this first day of January in the year of our Lord 1863, and in accordance with my purpose so to do publicly proclaim for the full period of 100 days, from the first day above mentioned, order and designate as the states and parts of states wherein the people thereof respectively are this day in rebellion against the United States, the following to it: Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, except the parishes of St. Bernard, Palaquemes, Jefferson, St. John, St. Charles, St. James, Assumption, Terrebonne, Le Rocher, St. Mary, St. Martin, and Orleans, including the city of New Orleans, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, except the 48 counties designated as West Virginia, and also the counties of Berkeley, Accomack, Northampton, Elizabeth City, York, Princess Anne, and Norfolk, including the cities of Norfolk and Portsmouth, and which expected parts are for the present left precisely as if this proclamation were not issued. And by virtue of the power and for the purpose aforesaid, I do order and declare that all persons held as slaves within said designated states and parts of states are and henceforward shall be free, and that the executive government of the United States, including the military and naval authorities thereof, will recognize and maintain the freedom of said persons. And I hereby enjoin upon the people so declare to be free to abstain from all violence, unless in necessary self-defense, and I recommend to them that, in all case when allowed, they labor faithfully for reasonable wages. And I further declare and make known that such persons of suitable condition will be received into the armed services of the United States to garrison forts, positions, stations, and other places, and to man vessels of all sorts in said service. And upon this act, sincerely believed to be an act of justice, warranted by the Constitution upon military necessity, I invoke the considerable judgment of mankind and the gracious favor of Almighty God. In witness thereof, I hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the United States to be affixed. Done at the city of Washington, this first day of January in the year of our Lord 1863, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 87th. By the President Abraham Lincoln, William H. Seward, Secretary of State. What Lincoln, we all know it freed slaves, but a reminder, the Emancipation Proclamation only freed slaves in rebel-held territories. Lincoln even specifically lists, when he's listing the states that the slaves are now free, when he's mentioning these specific counties and areas of like Louisiana and Virginia where they're not free. And he also, if you notice, he doesn't mention Tennessee in there because Tennessee by that point is largely occupied by Union forces. It's no longer in Confederate hands. So, with the exception of those areas that he points out, and then the exclusion of Tennessee, slaves are still legal there because they're no longer under rebel control. It was basically an attempt. He issued the proclamation in September of 62. It would not kick into effect until 1863 on January 1st. He was basically giving the South time, basically saying that if this war is not about slavery, I invite you to put your arms down now, and you can keep the slaves. Refuse to, and by come January the 1st, your slaves are free. Well, that's another damning piece of evidence, put point blankly, because you got these neo-Confederates that they say, oh, it wasn't about slavery, it never was. Okay, then why, when the South was given the opportunity to come back into the Union with its rights and representation and its slaves intact, it was given the opportunity. If it was not about slavery, why didn't they take that opportunity? What did the South do? It refused. It refused to come back, forcing Lincoln's hand to free the slaves. But they seem to forget that little piece of information. Our second one. Oh, I didn't realize that was in here. Hmm. That's not as important, though. It's more something trivial. The next one that we're going to read is, of course, probably Lincoln's most well-known speech. It's barely 200 words long. It's about 272 words, so it's very short. And it's his Gettysburg Address. That I'm pretty sure we've all heard at least once in our life, but we're going to read it for the purpose of today. The Gettysburg Address, delivered at the dedication of the cemetery at Gettysburg. Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us the living rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Dated November 19th, 1863. Which Lincoln is pretty much he's pretty much summing up the cause of the war at that point. What are we fighting for? And he does it in as few words as possible, but he delivers a speech that has resounded to this day. That this government will not perish. It is for the people, by the people, and that there shall be a new birth of freedom in it for those who were previously enslaved. The last speech that I wanted to read here, and then we'll end this little video, is Lincoln's second inaugural, which is in no way near as long as the first. But it really strikes up a reconciliatory tone. The reconciliatory tone that really he was pretty much already wanting. The reconciliatory tone that Lincoln was trying to put for the second inaugural was that the war's pretty much come to an end. It's about to end at this point. He knows that the war is almost done. But he also knows that the nation's not done yet. Healing is going to have to take place after the war. We're going to have to reconstruct the South, but I don't want to punish them. And he really puts that forward in the second address. Many historians actually say this kind of gives a light onto what actually guided Lincoln during the war. Fellow countrymen, at this second appearing to take the oath of the presidential office, there is less occasion for an extended address than there was at the first. Then a statement, somewhat in detail, of a course to be pursued, seemed fitting and proper. Now, with the expiration of 4 years, during which public declarations have been constantly called forth on every point and phase of the great contest which still absorbs the attention and engrosses the energies of the nation, little that is new could be presented. The progress of our arms, upon which all else chiefly depends, is as well known to the public as to myself, and it is, I trust, reasonably satisfactory and encouraging to all. With high hope for the future, no prediction in regard to it is ventured. On the occasion corresponding to this 4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed to an impending civil war. All dreaded it, all sought to avert it. While the inaugural address was being delivered from this place, devoted altogether to saving the Union without a war, insurgent agents were in the city seeking to destroy it without war, seeking to dissolve the Union and divide effects by negotiation. Both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish, and the war came. 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. To strengthen, perpetuate, and extend this interest was the object for which the insurgents would rend the Union, even by war, while the government claimed no right to do more than to restrict the territorial enlargement of it. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it has already attained. Neither anticipated that the cause of the conflict might cease with or even before the conflict itself should cease. Each looked for an easier triumph, and a result less fundamental and astounding. Both read the same Bible, and both read the same Bible, and pray to the same God, and each evokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces, but let us judge not that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered, that of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which in the providence of God must needs come, but which having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war, as the woe due to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it will continue, until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn by the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, still it must be said. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. That sums up Lincoln's view toward the end of the war, what he thought the war had been about. He kind of viewed it as a punishment from God on the United States, that both North and South were equally guilty. Both North and South were guilty on this. They were guilty of letting this pestilent cancer of slavery permeate into American society, the sin, and that the war was somehow God's punishment to finally force us to get rid of it, but we were going to have to pay a heavy price, as he stated, until every last drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid with another drawn by the sword. He viewed all of this as possibly necessary to basically pay up the due that was due to God for the sin of slavery. But that's basically all we wanted to do today. I mean, there are a plethora of other of Lincoln's writings, but these were just some of the big ones I really wanted to just take a moment on their own to read. and give them the proper time that I think they should have been afforded. So that concludes for today. We will be back next week. I don't know what our next video is going to be yet, so again, any suggestions highly taken right now, as we're finally going to take a break from the presidents for at least a little while. So we'll be back next week with whatever video either I come up with or gets suggested. So as always, like, subscribe, any comments or questions in the thing below. Hopefully everyone continues to have a good rest of their week, and have a great day, and may God bless you all.